My wife and I went on a vacation to Alaska last month to celebrate our 5th anniversary. I know you're probably wondering why Alaska. We wanted to see the Northern Lights. We both thought it would be something we could tell our kids about one day. Our trip did not go as planned, but luckily we made it home safely. We had a great time in the beginning. We ate great food, met some of the locals, and got some amazing photographs. We went ice skating. I did fall once, but only once, so that was a small bonus. On our first night there, we could not see the Northern Lights. Then again, on the second night, no luck. We knew it would happen soon, since usually you can see them 4 out of 5 nights. We were having a great time anyways. On our third night, we hiked out to the spot that some locals told us had the best view. They told us to be careful and pay attention to our surroundings. One man even told us that only locals go to the spot and that maybe it wasn't a great idea. We found the local spot with no issues and cuddled up on a warm blanket to watch the sky. Not only were the Northern Lights in full view, the moon was also full. It was amazing. We finally got what we came for. We sat for a while, talked, and took some great pictures. We also listened to the wolves howling in the distance. Once we figured it was time to head back, we packed our blanket back up, took a few more pictures, and walked off hand in hand. As we were walking, we heard a howl, much louder than before. He was close, and I could sense the fear coming from my wife. We held hands a little tighter and tried to hurry our pace along a bit. The area we were walking through was not heavily wooded. The trees were pretty spread out. Both of us were power walking. We had to be really careful because neither one of us was used to walking on snow or ice. I wanted to run. We heard the howl again, even closer. I couldn't leave my wife behind. If I didn't have so much love for our relationship, I might have just run off. We could hear something crunching through the snow behind us. It was still some distance from us, but it was closing in. We still had to exit the woods and cross over an unpaved road to get back to people. My wife asked me if we should hide or maybe run. I didn't think hiding was a good idea since animals can smell pretty well. And I didn't think running was a good idea either, because if one of us fell, we could be easy prey. We still had at least a 5-minute walk to the tree line, even though we were walking fast. The crunching was growing louder. We ran when we heard the growl. We didn't turn and look, we just ran. My wife was in the lead and I was just trying to keep up. We zigzagged through trees, jumped over branches and rocks, and somehow stayed running. We didn't fall, but I realized we may have zigzagged and thrown off our course some. I yelled at my wife to turn slightly to left and keep running. We did. I heard a howl from right behind me and finally decided to look back. I should not have. The thing that was after us was running on 2 legs. It had a long snout like a dog, and its mouth was full of sharp canine teeth. It was snarling and gnashing its teeth at me. The thing's whole body was covered in fur, and I could still see its muscles rippling as it ran. So I picked up my pace as much as I could. I was honestly thankful my wife was ahead. I could not live with myself if the worst was to happen. I jetted to the right some to keep it on my track. I heard the crunching of the snow behind me, and the thing growled again. I zigzagged again to the left and realized I could see the tree line. I put everything I had into that last sprint and prayed that my wife had already made it through and kept running. I just kept waiting to feel a tackle or a bite. I did not want to look back again. I did not want to see how close it was to me. I just wanted to make it through the tree line. I knew that it was still going to be behind me once I made it out, but maybe someone would see us and help. I finally broke through the tree line, and I could finally see my wife had passed over the unpaved road and was still running. I hit the road and just kept going. I did not hear anything behind me now. I took a quick glance and realized it had stopped at the tree line. It was standing there watching me. It let out a final howl and turned back to the woods. I still ran. We made it back to our lodging and immediately moved our flight up. I told my wife what I had seen. My wife thought maybe my fear caused me to see a 2-legged creature instead of processing what was really chasing us. I think the strangest thing about all of it was that when we went down for breakfast, the old woman who told us about the local spot looked really surprised to see us. I have been wondering if she has seen what is out there, but I never found out. We saw what we set out to see. It was beautiful. The aftermath, though, I just don't know what to say. Be careful out there. There are definitely more things in the world than we want to believe. I was a city worker in a tourist town on one of the Great Lakes. I'm not sure if I feel comfortable saying which one on here. I've never told this story to anyone before today, and I don't want anyone I know to think I'm crazy. I don't believe in ghosts or monsters or the supernatural, but I don't have any other explanation for what I saw. I was working on an old historical lighthouse. The city wanted to refurbish it and potentially open it to the public for tours, but it needed some electrical work done first, so they hired yours truly. Now, if you've never done any work in old buildings, they can be a bit of a challenge. There's always something that goes wrong in one way or another, and I was having one of those days. I had a pretty busy week scheduled, so I wanted to get this lighthouse done by the end of the day, at whatever cost. And that meant staying late, well after dark. I never once had a strange feeling about the lighthouse or the surrounding area. People always talk about how they knew something was wrong before it happened, but I never got that feeling. I won't say it wasn't a little creepy to be working alone in this lighthouse once the sun went down, but I never felt anything bad. I should probably say a little bit about the lake I was overlooking. Without giving away the exact location, this particular lake is known for its bad storms and shipwrecks. Storms that seem to come out of nowhere. It can be calm here one minute and whitecaps the next. I was intent on my work, trying to get this thing done as quickly as possible, when I heard the sound of a ship's horn. This isn't a functioning lighthouse, and large ships didn't typically come this way anymore. I looked out the window and I didn't see any lights out there on the water, but the sound of the horn was deafening. I knew I wasn't imagining it. I stared out the window for a moment. I know it was only a few seconds, but it felt like hours. I was entranced. Suddenly, a thick fog began to roll in from the lake. It crept across the rocks and all the way to the base of the lighthouse. It was insane how quickly it appeared, but this lake is known for changing weather. I heard the horn again. It was undoubtedly the horn of a ship, but as I said before, there were no ships on this part of the lake. I went back to my work. I was so close to getting this thing up and running, and I really wanted to be done with this project. I was interrupted again, but this time by a light shining through the window. It was blinding, and I couldn't see where it was coming from. For a moment, I was terrified it was a ship about to crash into the rocks, because the only thing in that direction was the water. The whole thing was a little too weird. The unexplainable ship's horn and the sudden blinding light. I decided to head down the stairs and investigate what on earth was going on outside. The lighthouse only had one window facing the lake, so I couldn't see anything facing land. When I got outside, the fog was so thick I could barely see my hands in front of me. I heard the ship's horn once again, and this time I could pinpoint the sound coming from towards the water. I swore I heard a woman crying, but I wasn't exactly sure. It was like the fog had muffled the sound. I walked further towards the water. I reached the rocks and made sure to step carefully so I didn't misjudge where I was standing and fall in. The sound of the woman crying grew stronger, and as I got closer, it sounded less like crying and more like singing. I followed the voice. I don't know why. Looking back, it was a terrible idea, but that never crossed my mind at the time. I know I said before that people usually instinctively know when there is something wrong. I never felt any of that. The fog was so thick that I didn't see the creature until I almost stepped on it. It stopped singing when I reached it. It had a human voice, but it was definitely not human. It was a little bald thing with pale skin and big silver eyes. I had never seen eyes like that before. It smelled of fish and had teeth I can only describe as similar to a cat's. I pulled out my utility knife as soon as I saw its teeth. I didn't know what it was, but I didn't want it to come near me. I don't know if it was fear or anger in those big silver eyes, but it took one look at me and leapt into the water. I don't know how else to describe it. It had arms and legs like a person, but it definitely wasn't a person. I never told anyone what I saw, not ever. I mean, how could you explain that to people? I'm convinced it tried to lure me out there with the sound of the ship and the light and the singing. I don't know what its end goal was, and I'm not sure I want to know. I locked the lighthouse up for the night and decided to finish it the next day. I didn't run into anything strange out there in the daylight. And I did walk down to the spot where I saw the creature and found no signs of it. I'm usually a little self-conscious about telling this story because of the absurdity of the whole thing, but this is anonymous anyway, so here goes. I'm from California, but from a more northern suburban area outside of the major cities. My friends and I love to go hiking and sightseeing and things like that in our spare time, mostly because it's just about the only thing in California you can do for free. Once, though, we had this insane run-in with the most unexplainable beast. My friends and I took our van out a bit to go exploring. We brought food, some beer, a speaker. It was all set to be a really fun day. And it was at first. We found a spot to park and set up this really cool picnic area and started playing some jams. Then one of my friends said that there was another amazing area up ahead for photos. We hopped right on that, stupidly leaving all our stuff behind. We could not have been gone for more than an hour, maybe even less. But despite that, it was long enough for us to return to an absolutely demolished display. Nobody touched our van itself, which was odd because the keys were in the ignition, and it could have been easily stolen. But aside from the van, everything else was ruined. The most noticeable thing that we made a note of as we observed the wreckage was the nasty stench. It kind of smelled like a wet dog, you know? Or like how everyone smells right after a gym class in the locker room. Just straight gross body odor combined with what could only be described as a urine stink. Much to our dismay, the food was completely gone. All that remained was a few crumbs, barely enough to even make me think any food was there to begin with. Whoever did this was definitely hungry. The next thing, the weirdest thing in my opinion, is that the radio we had, the one that was playing music, was destroyed. Ripped entirely in half. Yes, I said ripped. It was like someone had just picked it up and snapped it. That was really freaky for a number of reasons. First off, what thing has the strength and hand structure necessary to grab something of that size and just snap it? Secondly, it was kind of frightening, the whole thing. And it didn't help that it was a really expensive radio. So now we're all just kind of registering and processing what we saw. Because there's only a few possibilities. We weren't gone very long, so whatever did it was definitely still around here somewhere, in the nearby vicinity. Some of us were really panicked, shaking, freaking out. Others, like me, were just sort of confused and wanted to know what exactly happened because it didn't add up to anything remotely explainable. So, the ever-brave person that I am, I decided I should look around and investigate. I figured it's an animal. What's it going to do if there's like 5 humans surrounding it? It's going to get scared and run off. That's what I was thinking, so there couldn't be too much to be worried about. Looking back, I was pretty wrong. We're looking, and there's no sign of much of anything anywhere around us. Then, as we're following a trail, we see something. Footprints on the ground in the mud. This is the part of the story that sounds the most far-fetched, I think, just because of how stereotypical it is. But when we looked at those footprints, we saw feet that were significantly larger than any person's feet could naturally grow. They were, as the term originates, big feet. So now I think we're either being pranked or in some serious trouble looking for something that obviously has no interest in being found. I told my friends that if the thing wanted to attack us, it would have. If it wanted us to see it, it would have made itself visible. So our day was absolutely ruined. We all started packing up what remained and got the heck out of there. Now I'd like to say that was the end and we didn't notice anything else. But I did. I didn't want to freak out my friends, you know, and I also didn't want to call attention to it, but I saw the creature, Not for more than a minute and not for more than a glance, but I did get a decent look as it stood there observing us from a distance. It was gigantic, nearly as tall as some of the bushes it was trying to hide behind, like 9 feet tall. It was clearly hiding, maybe even scared, so I didn't feel afraid. In fact, I sort of wished I could have made some kind of contact with it somehow. It was furry head to toe, like an animal. But its limbs, its head shape and facial features, they were all sort of human. It had kind of beady little eyes and a sort of pinhead, but it still had this energy about it like it knew what was happening. It was also completely ripped with muscles. I definitely knew in that moment how it was able to rip apart the speaker so easily. After I was half satisfied, half shocked enough from looking at it, I turned away and continued to help clean up, acting like nothing was wrong. I honestly never told my friends I got that look at it, and I don't know if I ever will. I wouldn't mind if I ran into it again, you know? Maybe it was nice. I'd really like to know. My family owned a small vacation home along the Indian River Bay. Over the years, I had a few run-ins with some interesting characters. I had spent a lot of time wandering around the maze of marshes and wetlands and knew my way around pretty well. I even had a secret place that I would go to crab. A small channel from the bay emptied into a deceptively deep lagoon, and I would sometimes leave a crab pot or two in the water and return the next day to a decent catch. The summer of the first incident, there was a scandal sweeping the bay. Someone or something was stealing crabs from crab pots. A lot of people supplemented their income from selling the crabs, and some even fully sustained themselves. There were patrols from the bay constables and even some vigilante locals who were up in arms. It was all just cool background noise for me. I didn't really care if people were stealing crabs. Besides, I had my secret spot. And that's where it happened. The day before, I had left 2 pots in my lagoon, one at the mouth where the inlet runs in, and the other further back in deeper water. I was returning late in the evening, an hour or two before dark, to check on my pots. The area around the lagoon was overgrown with tall marsh grass, and it was almost impossible to see more than a few feet. But as I got closer to the lagoon, I began hearing some very strange sounds. The first was a splashing noise, like somebody was jumping into the water of the lagoon and splashing around. That would not have been a good idea. Besides the nasty muddy water and eels, there were plenty of snapping turtles in the water that could literally take a finger off. I heard the noise multiple times, so I guess there was more than one person. The other sound was the croaking of bullfrogs, and they must have been big. Now I was really baffled. Frogs didn't live near salt water, at least not around here, and even if they were, there was no way they could have been big enough to make that splashing noise I was hearing. Quietly moving the last few yards to the edge of the lagoon, I parted some marsh grass to look through and was thoroughly stupefied at what I saw. I can only describe them as, and I know how this sounds, but as frog people. There were 3 of them, all a shade of deep green with varying patterns of dark splotches and ridges running along their bodies. The one who was standing was a little over 3 feet high. The other was wallowing in the lagoon, while the third was crouched down in shallower water fiddling with something. It was my crab pot. As I watched in fascination, the creature with my crab pot managed to pull the bungee cord around and get the pot open. The one watching from the shore began croaking in excitement and picked up what looked like a small reed basket that was lying on the ground next to it. They emptied the contents of the pot into the basket, and then the second creature actually closed the pot back up and put it back in the water where it had found it. The third creature that had been lazily swimming around eventually made his way over to the deeper of the 2 pots. It dove under and came back up a moment later, thrumming to its partners. That's when I heard something behind me. I whipped around and came face to face with a 4th creature that looked just as surprised to see me. It was shorter than the others and had a squiggling eel in one hand. I was too in awe of this bizarre scene to really do anything, just staring at this thing that shouldn't exist. It let out a pair of rapid, high-pitched croaks and bounded off through the thick marsh grass. I turned back to the lagoon just as the last of the creatures disappeared under the water, 3 rings of ripples echoing where they had made their escape. They were gone. Who would ever believe something so asinine as frog people? Still, I tried to tell my parents, but they just thought I was being funny. I was 13 at the time and wasn't an overly imaginative kid, so when I insisted that I was telling the truth, my parents really started getting upset. They started asking all kinds of questions like if I was doing drugs or drinking, so I just dropped the whole thing, but I never forgot. Over the next few years, I always tried to find more evidence of these creatures. I was afraid to talk about it with anyone for fear of seeming crazy, and the internet was a pit of conflicting information and tall tales. But eventually I did find more evidence. I had borrowed my neighbor's canoe for the day and was paddling around some of the backwater, not too far from the lagoon where I had first seen them. As I came around a bend in the tight channel, I almost ran the bow of the canoe right into the head of one of them. It must have just been treading water, and it dipped below the surface before I could even react. But it was definitely one of the same creatures. My family was selling the shore house and purchasing a new one in Ocean City, Maryland. I would probably never come back to this spot again and wanted to take it all in one more time. I made the trek to the lagoon and was kind of just poking around when I saw a bunch of small shapes darting around in the water. They were too small to be the creatures, and I thought that maybe they were eels, but I want to investigate. They were tadpoles. The biggest tadpoles I had ever seen. Each was about 6 or 8 inches long, and there were dozens of them. I considered taking one of them, but my conscience wouldn't allow me to do it. I let them be, and that was the last time I ever had any interaction with these mysterious creatures. I'm not going to give any details on where exactly this lagoon is. I think that these things just want to be left in peace, and we should respect that.